On a quiet December evening in 2021, the heart of America was torn open by something almost too violent to comprehend. A monstrous supercell, spanning hundreds of miles, began carving a path of destruction unlike anything the modern Midwest had ever witnessed. Entire towns vanished in minutes. Neighborhoods that stood for generations were reduced to splinters. And in the middle of this chaos was a tornado so powerful, so relentless, that revived a name many believed belonged only to the history books, the Quad-State tornado. But this wasn't just a storm. It was a 200-mile-long nightmare, a catastrophe that blurred the line between natural disaster and something that felt almost otherworldly. How did one storm system unleash such focused fury? Why did it last so long? And how did a single tornado outbreak leave 89 people dead in an era of advanced radars and early warnings? Tonight, we travel back into the core of that darkness to uncover the unbelievable truth behind the Quad-State outbreak. If you're fascinated by extreme weather, real-world mysteries, or the raw power of nature, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive documentary. And if you know someone who lived through this night, share this video, because their story deserves to be remembered. In the hours before the outbreak, the Midwest felt strangely still, almost too still. People went about their routines without realizing that the atmosphere above them was quietly loading a weapon. The sun had dipped behind a blanket of thin clouds, the kind that make the sky look soft and harmless. For many, it was just another December evening. Christmas lights blinked softly on front porches. Families wrapped gifts. Factory workers clocked in for their night shifts. And yet, something felt off. Meteorologists would later say the air was charged, but on the ground, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt eerie, warm, unusually warm for December, like the season itself had stepped aside for something unnatural. The kind of warmth that makes you glance at the sky, even though you're not sure why. In towns across Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee, and Kentucky, that same unsettling atmosphere hung overhead. Pets paced. The wind briefly changed directions. A few folks joked about tornado weather, but even those who'd lived through storms for decades didn't expect anything historic. Not tonight, because no one imagined that a supercell was already brewing, one that would soon travel over 250 miles, crossing 4 states, tearing through towns in the dead of night. A storm so relentless that survivors would later swear it sounded alive, like a freight train that refused to stop. This was the last quiet moment before the Midwest met the unimaginable. Long before the first tornado touched down, the atmosphere was quietly assembling the ingredients for disaster. High above the central United States, a powerful jet stream was carving through the sky. A fast-moving river of air that can turn a simple thunderstorm into something far more dangerous. At the surface, warm, humid air surged northward from the Gulf of Mexico, meeting a pocket of cold, dense air sliding in from the northwest. When these opposing forces collide, nature doesn't negotiate. It reacts. Meteorologists watching radar noticed a cluster of thunderstorms beginning to organize. At first glance, they looked ordinary, bright colors on a screen, pulsing like a heartbeat. But inside the most promising storm cell, winds were already rotating. A mesocyclone, the signature of a storm that could spawn a tornado. Conditions were nearly perfect for something explosive. Wind shear twisting the atmosphere, instability offering fuel, and moisture feeding it all like oxygen to a flame. If the atmosphere had a recipe book, this night contained every ingredient circled, underlined, and highlighted. The supercell grew stronger as it moved northeast. Its towering anvil top stretched miles into the sky, catching the last light of day. Below it, an invisible tube of rotating air tightened, gathering strength with each passing minute. The storm wasn't just forming, it was evolving, becoming organized, becoming dangerous, becoming historic, and soon it would descend upon the first unsuspecting town in its path. Inside weather offices across the region, meteorologists leaned closer to their monitors as the storm developed. At first, the radar showed typical thunderstorm signatures, nothing that screamed catastrophe. But then, subtle changes began to appear. The rotation inside the storm tightened. Velocity scans lit up with colors that indicated rapidly shifting winds. And then came the moment every forecaster dreads. A hook echo started to form. A hook echo is nature's signature, a radar fingerprint that means a tornado is trying to happen. And on this night, that signature wasn't weak or disorganized. It was sharp, defined, almost aggressive. Meteorologists immediately issued tornado watches, then warnings, urging residents to head to shelters. But night tornadoes carry their own sinister power. You can't see them coming. You can't watch the sky for clues. Most people are at home, relaxing or getting ready for bed, unaware that a storm above them is sharpening its teeth. And on this particular night, warm December air made residents even less suspicious. Tornadoes in winter? Sure, they happen, but not like this. Not with this kind of energy behind them. Phones buzzed with alerts. Weather radio alarms blared. Some families took the warnings seriously, heading into basements or storm shelters. Others hesitated, waiting for more signs or thinking the storms would blow past like so many others before. But the radar was now clear. This wasn't another routine warning. It was the first alarm bell of a night that would reshape history. As darkness settled across northeast Arkansas, the storm finally made its move. At 8:54 p.m., just outside the small town of Monette, the rotating mass inside the supercell dipped toward the ground. What began as a funnel hidden in the night quickly transformed into a violent tornado. Large, fast, and already gaining strength. Few saw it with their eyes, but many felt it. A sudden shift in the wind, a low rumble that didn't fit the rhythm of normal weather. Residents who glanced outside saw only shadows and flashes of lightning. But between those flashes, some caught glimpses of something terrifying. Debris rising into the air, trees bending in unnatural directions, and a dark mass moving where no dark should be. The tornado was already on the ground, and it wasn't easing into its destruction. It was accelerating. Monette's nursing home was among the first structures struck. Walls buckled, roofs peeled off like paper. In seconds, the building was torn open, exposing residents and staff to the storm's full fury. First responders rushed in as soon as the winds passed, climbing through debris in the darkness, calling out names, shining flashlights into collapsed rooms. This was only the beginning. In the surrounding fields, power lines snapped and grain silos crumpled. The path of destruction widened with every mile. The tornado was stabilizing, growing stronger, becoming something far more dangerous than anyone expected from a December storm. Nightfall had become a battlefield. With every mile it traveled, the tornado began to evolve, almost as if the storm itself was learning how to become more destructive. What had started as a powerful but typical nighttime tornado was now intensifying into something far more alarming. Scanning the radar, meteorologists watched in disbelief as the rotational signature tightened and expanded at the same time. That doesn't happen often. Tornadoes usually do one or the other. This one was doing both. Wind surged past 150 miles per hour, then 170, then higher. Debris from homes, barns, and entire neighborhoods began rising thousands of feet into the air, showing up on radar as a massive debris ball, a chilling indicator that the tornado wasn't just hitting structures, it was annihilating them. Forecasters knew what that meant. This was no brief touchdown. This was a kind of tornado that cuts long, deadly paths. On the ground, residents heard the storm shift from a low, distant roar to a deep, bone-shaking growl. People who'd lived through tornadoes before described it as different, heavier, louder, angrier. Vehicles were tossed like toys. Thick trees snapped cleanly at the base. Brick buildings folded inward. The tornado's forward speed increased, too, moving so fast that many never heard a siren before impact. The supercell above continued feeding it warm, moist air, and the tornado responded like a living force, widening, strengthening, accelerating. It was no longer just a storm. It was becoming the monster that would define the night. By the time the tornado reached Mayfield, Kentucky, it had transformed into a full-scale catastrophe. The town, quiet, historic, and beautifully lit with Christmas decorations, had no idea that within minutes, its downtown would be unrecognizable. The tornado approached with a speed and intensity that left almost no time to react. The sky turned an inky black, illuminated only by sporadic lightning flashes that revealed an enormous, wedge-shaped mass barreling toward the city. The first structures to fall were on the outskirts. Homes were lifted from their foundations. Trees were shredded into splinters. But as the tornado crossed into the heart of Mayfield, the destruction became total. Buildings that had stood for over a century were reduced to piles of brick and twisted steel. Storefronts, churches, offices gone. A community that had survived wars, droughts, and recessions was suddenly fighting for its life. Downtown Mayfield turned into hell in seconds. Cars were flipped and thrown blocks away. Walls collapsed inward. Streets filled with debris so thick, people couldn't tell what they were stepping on. Survivors crawled out from basements, closets, and safe rooms, emerging into a landscape so altered it felt unreal. Even seasoned storm chasers, watching from miles out, were stunned. Their cameras captured images of an enormous debris cloud swirling above what used to be a city. Mayfield was no longer recognizable. Its center wiped clean as if erased by a giant hand. The horror had only begun. As the tornado roared into Mayfield, one building in particular became the epicenter of the night's most heartbreaking tragedy: the Mayfield Consumer Products Candle Factory. Inside, more than 100 workers were racing to meet holiday demand. Machines hummed, pallets rolled across the floor, and supervisors moved quickly between stations. It was loud, busy, and full of life, until everything changed. The power flickered. Workers paused. A few glanced toward the high windows, noticing flashes of lightning cutting through the darkness. Some had received tornado warnings on their phones, but many assumed it was just another storm. After all, the building was large, sturdy, reinforced. It felt safe. But within minutes, the sound of the approaching tornado became unmistakable, a deep, violent rumble. One worker later described it as a scream coming from the sky. Supervisors shouted for everyone to take cover. Workers huddled together in interior hallways, crouching beside machinery, sheltering under tables. But the tornado was already upon them. The factory walls buckled first. The metal roof peeled away like wrapping paper. Then came the sudden collapse. Massive steel beams crashing down, lights exploding, concrete snapping under pressure. People were thrown, buried, pinned. Screams mixed with the deafening roar of wind and shattering metal. When the tornado finally passed, the factory was a mound of twisted steel and debris, trapping dozens inside. First responders clawed through rubble in the darkness, calling out names, listening for any faint voice answering back. That night, 9 workers lost their lives inside the ruins. After tearing through Mayfield, the tornado pressed northeast with terrifying momentum, heading straight toward the small town of Dawson Springs. This community of just under 3,000 people had seen storms before, bad ones, even memorable ones, but nothing that could prepare them for what was coming. The tornado that approached was enormous, violent, and moving at highway speed. Many residents had only minutes or seconds to react. As the storm barreled in, entire neighborhoods faced the full brunt of its power. Whole rows of homes were ripped from their foundations and scattered across fields. Trees that had shaded generations of families were snapped into jagged stumps. A water tower collapsed. Vehicles were hurled into houses. The destruction wasn't random. It was complete. One section of town, called the Pine Ridge neighborhood, was hit so hard that it looked as if it had been shredded by a giant grinder. Photographs taken the next morning would reveal an almost unbelievable sight. Street after street of nothing but concrete slabs and scattered debris. Not walls, not frames, just slabs. Yet amid the devastation came stories of survival that seemed almost impossible. Families who climbed out of mangled bathtubs. Children rescued from beneath piles of rubble. Neighbors digging for neighbors in total darkness, using only flashlights and phone screens to guide them. By the time the tornado left Dawson Springs, more than 60% of the town was gone. Entire blocks erased. A community reshaped forever. After the tornado moved on, an eerie calm fell over the devastated towns. The storm had passed, but it left behind a haunting silence broken only by the distant sound of sirens, the creak of broken trees, and the crackle of fires that had erupted amid the wreckage. Buildings that had collapsed sometimes sparked from exposed electrical lines, igniting flames that danced over the debris like ghostly torches. Smoke curled into the cold night, mixing with the mist and ash. Power lines were down everywhere. Streets were unrecognizable. Some areas were so heavily damaged that residents couldn't even locate their homes. In the darkness, only the outlines of roofs, walls, and shattered vehicles remained as clues to what had once been familiar. The destruction was total, but paradoxically quiet, so quiet that the magnitude of the disaster felt almost surreal. First responders, emergency crews, and volunteers moved quickly, but even their presence couldn't fill the void. Flashlights illuminated mangled streets. Rescue dogs sniffed through rubble. Shouts echoed across empty neighborhoods as survivors were pulled from collapsed homes or found safe in basements. And yet, for many, the night brought a strange mix of horror and awe. The destructive force of nature, fully unleashed, was terrifying, but it was also mesmerizing in its raw, unstoppable power. It was a reminder that even in modern times, the earth can remind us who really holds the upper hand. The fires burned on, a flickering testament to what had been and what had been lost. The tornado didn't stop. For over 3 hours, it carved a path of destruction across 4 states, leaving a trail so long that meteorologists were struggling to comprehend it. From Monette, Arkansas, to Mayfield and Dawson Springs in Kentucky, and beyond, it moved like a relentless predator, each mile marked by flattened homes, shattered trees, and lives forever changed. Nightfall made everything worse. Darkness amplified the fear, hiding the full scale of destruction and making escape nearly impossible. For residents, the hours dragged like an eternity. Every gust of wind sounded like the storm was right outside the window, even miles away. Every crash, every scream, every snapping tree made hearts pound in terror. Families huddled together in basements, closets, or makeshift shelters, wondering if this would be the night they didn't make it through. Time seemed to stretch. Minutes became hours. The storm's roaring, grinding fury never let up. Meteorologists tracked it as it maintained an astonishingly long, continuous path, over 200 miles. Experts argued over whether it was one tornado or a series of connected vortices. Either way, the night became a historical event, one of the longest, deadliest tornadoes in modern memory. By the time dawn began to break, the first faint light revealed towns unrecognizable, roads blocked by debris, and communities mourning loved ones. The tornado had left more than 89 dead and countless injured. It stretched the very limits of what anyone thought a storm could do. The longest night in the Quad-State region had finally ended, but its scars would last a lifetime. As daylight broke over the devastated region, scientists, meteorologists, and storm chasers began analyzing the evidence. One question dominated the discussion. Was this a single, continuous tornado or a family of tornadoes spawned by the same supercell? The answer was far from simple. Radar data showed a massive, nearly uninterrupted path of destruction stretching over 200 miles. Witnesses described a single, enormous funnel, yet some gaps in the damage suggested multiple touchdowns. For experts, this raised a debate that would continue for months. Defining a tornado isn't just about what you see. It's about the meteorological signature, the rotation, and the continuity of damage. And this storm challenged every textbook definition. The Quad-State tornado, label became both symbolic and contentious. One thing was certain. The tornado outbreak was unprecedented in size and scope for the modern era. But was it truly one tornado? Some argued that its hour-long duration and the consistency of its path suggested a single, extraordinary storm. Others claimed the storm likely produced multiple tornadoes, merging into one terrifying force as they crossed state lines. For residents who lived through it, the debate mattered less than survival and recovery. Still, understanding whether it was one tornado or a sequence of connected twisters held critical value for forecasting, emergency response, and future safety measures. In the end, the quad-state tornado became more than a scientific question. It became a symbol of nature's unpredictability, leaving both experts and ordinary people in awe of its raw, destructive power. While residents were still reeling from the initial tornado, the supercell wasn't done. Across the region, additional tornadoes began to form, spawned by the same volatile storm system. For towns that had just begun to breathe, the second wave hit like a cruel reminder that nature was far from finished. These new tornadoes were smaller in size, but no less dangerous. They tore through farmland, small towns, and residential areas with brutal efficiency. Power lines snapped again. Roads that had begun to clear were blocked by new debris. Emergency crews, already stretched thin, raced to multiple locations at once, their radios crackling with urgent reports of damage and casualties. Some survivors barely had time to recover from the first strike before being forced to take cover again. Families huddled in basements for the second time, eyes wide, hearts pounding, listening to the wind scream through shattered windows. For many, it felt like the storm had a mind of its own, chasing them relentlessly. Meteorologists watched in disbelief as the tornadoes multiplied, creating a chaotic patchwork of destruction across the quad-state area. Every new touchdown brought renewed urgency to radar monitoring, warning systems, and emergency alerts. For those on the ground, there was no pattern, only a relentless series of life-threatening events. By the early morning hours, the second wave had claimed additional lives, destroyed more property, and cemented the outbreak as one of the most intense multi-tornado events in modern U.S. history. As the storms raged on, first responders faced an almost impossible challenge: getting to survivors through streets littered with debris, fallen trees, and power lines. Every second mattered, yet every mile was a battle. Ambulances, fire trucks, and volunteers navigated treacherous roads, often with little visibility and no clear landmarks. The clock was ticking, and the devastation was immense. Emergency crews coordinated across state lines, but communication was a major hurdle. Phone lines were down, radio signals scrambled, and in some areas, entire communication networks were knocked out. Dispatchers worked tirelessly, connecting volunteers with stranded residents, directing teams to the most critical locations. It was a chaotic race against both time and the aftereffects of the storms. For survivors, the night was far from over. Families trapped under collapsed roofs or crushed vehicles called out, hoping someone would hear. Some crawled through debris on their own, risking further injury, while others waited, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. Every rescue was a fragile victory. Every delay could mean the difference between life and death. In towns like Mayfield and Dawson Springs, the scale of destruction made traditional rescue methods nearly impossible. Volunteers and emergency personnel improvised, using chainsaws, cranes, and sheer manpower to reach those buried under rubble. Time was the enemy, but determination and human resilience pushed them forward. Through the long night, as dawn approached, the race against time defined the difference between survival and tragedy. Humanity was fighting back against nature's most relentless force. When the tornadoes finally moved on, a shocking reality emerged. People were alive, trapped in the wreckage of what had once been their homes, workplaces, and schools. In the darkness of collapsed buildings, survivors clung to hope, listening for voices, hoping a hand would reach them before it was too late. The stories that unfolded were nothing short of miraculous. In Mayfield, A man crawled out from beneath a fallen wall, dust covering his face, bruised but breathing. A mother found her children huddled beneath overturned furniture, terrified but unharmed. In Dawson Springs, neighbors worked together, forming human chains to dig through debris and pull friends and strangers alike to safety. Every rescue was a moment of relief and a reminder of human resilience. Some survivors had been buried for hours, using ingenuity and sheer willpower to create air pockets and protect themselves from further injury. Others had been tossed through rooms, landing in improbable positions that somehow spared them from death. Stories of pets rescued alongside their owners added a surreal, heartwarming layer to the tragedy. Yet, the rubble also revealed loss. Families mourned the immediate deaths of loved ones, while others faced uncertainty, searching through debris for missing family members. Every street became a mixture of hope and despair, the line between survival and tragedy painfully thin. In the aftermath, those who had survived in the rubble became living testaments to courage, endurance, and the fragile miracle of life amid devastation. By the time the Quad-State tornado outbreak came to an end, the human cost was staggering. 89 lives had been lost. Hundreds more were injured, some with life-altering wounds. Entire families were affected, parents mourning children, siblings losing each other, and neighbors grieving together in the shared shock of catastrophe. The emotional toll was as immense as the physical destruction. Hospitals overflowed with patients. Emergency rooms worked round the clock, treating everything from broken bones to severe trauma. Volunteer doctors, nurses, and paramedics came from miles around, forming a makeshift network of support in areas where infrastructure had been crippled. Trauma counselors and social workers arrived to help survivors process the horror they had witnessed. It was a reminder that disaster isn't only measured in buildings destroyed, it's measured in the hearts and minds of those left behind. Communities faced an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. Streets that had once been filled with laughter and everyday life now felt eerily hollow. Schools, workplaces, and homes had vanished, leaving gaps that couldn't be filled immediately. Grief was compounded by uncertainty. Many were still searching for missing loved ones days after the storms. Yet amid the sorrow, stories of courage emerged. People pulled from rubble, neighbors helping neighbors, first responders refusing to rest. In the darkest hours, human resilience shone through, proving that even in the wake of tragedy, hope endures. The outbreak had left scars that were more than physical. It had left a permanent mark on every life it touched. What made the Quad-State outbreak so extraordinary? Meteorologists quickly set to work unraveling the science behind the disaster, and the answers revealed a perfect storm of atmospheric conditions that rarely align. The supercell responsible for the tornadoes was a textbook case of energy meeting chaos, but on a scale that pushed modern meteorology to its limits. At the heart of the outbreak was an unusually strong jet stream, a river of fast-moving air high in the atmosphere. It clashed with warm, humid air streaming north from the Gulf of Mexico, creating extreme instability. Wind shear, changes in wind speed and direction at different altitudes, caused the air to rotate violently, forming mesocyclones, which are essentially the building blocks of tornadoes. The storms had all the ingredients: fuel, rotation, and lift. But few had ever seen them combine with such intensity for so long. The tornadoes also benefited from unusually warm December temperatures. This added warmth created extra moisture in the air, making the storms more energetic than typical winter tornadoes. Radar signatures showed massive debris balls, indicating that these were not only strong tornadoes, but also exceptionally destructive. Researchers later described the outbreak as a once-in-a-generation event, combining multiple supercell tornadoes into a nearly continuous path of devastation. The science explained the how, but it could not explain the sheer terror, the way entire communities were ripped apart in minutes, or why, despite modern technology, so many lives were lost. Nature had created something both scientifically fascinating and terrifyingly lethal. Meteorologists monitoring the outbreak were stunned by what they saw on radar. As the tornadoes moved across 4 states, the signature readings were unlike anything most forecasters had witnessed in their careers. The rotational velocity, the measure of how fast air was spinning, was off the charts. Debris balls, which appear when tornadoes lift buildings, trees, and other objects, were massive and persistent, showing that the tornado was not only strong, but incredibly destructive over a long distance. Radar images revealed astonishing details. A nearly continuous tornado path stretching over 200 miles, with rotational winds consistently exceeding 150 miles per hour in multiple areas. The storm's intensity fluctuated, but never weakened for long, making it one of the most sustained tornado events in modern history. Experts described it as both mesmerizing and terrifying, a rare chance to study a tornado of such scale, and a reminder of how little humans control when nature decides to unleash its power. Even seasoned storm chasers were awestruck. Drone footage, dash cams, and security cameras confirmed what radar was showing. A swirling wall of destruction, debris flying thousands of feet into the air, and entire towns erased in minutes. The radar didn't just track the storm. It told a story of relentless power, one that unfolded in real time across hundreds of miles. For forecasters, this radar was both a tool and a warning. Nature could strike with unprecedented force, and the Quad-State outbreak had proven it. As the Quad-State tornado carved its path, countless cameras, security cams, dash cams, and even cell phones recorded moments of horror and survival. Footage from businesses in Mayfield showed windows exploding inward as the tornado's winds hit, with shelves and equipment flying through the air. In Dawson Springs, dash cams captured vehicles being lifted, tossed, and crushed like toys against buildings and trees. Every frame told the story of a storm that refused to relent. Some of the most haunting images came from home security cameras, where people had no time to react. Families huddled in basements or closets were seen waiting, tense and silent, while above them, the house groaned and collapsed. Other cameras captured miraculous escapes, pets leaping from debris, neighbors pulling each other from rubble, and objects flying mere inches away from humans without causing harm. Drone footage, captured the next morning, revealed the full scale. Neighborhoods flattened, streets unrecognizable, and a continuous trail of destruction stretching across state lines. The aerial perspective made clear what survivors on the ground could only partially see: the sheer size, the power, and the indiscriminate nature of the tornadoes. These recordings did more than document devastation. They became crucial tools for meteorologists, emergency planners, and rescue teams, helping experts understand the storm's behavior. They also served as a stark reminder of human vulnerability and resilience when faced with the raw force of nature. For viewers and survivors alike, the night's events were forever etched in the images captured by these unblinking lenses. In the wake of destruction, ordinary people became extraordinary. Across the Quad-State region, heroes emerged, neighbors who risked their lives to pull family, friends, and strangers from the wreckage. First responders worked around the clock, navigating debris-strewn streets and collapsed buildings, often without sleep, driven only by the knowledge that every second counted. Stories of courage came from all corners. Volunteer firefighters used chainsaws and axes to reach trapped survivors. Local residents formed human chains to remove heavy debris. Some drove miles through blocked roads to deliver water, blankets, and first aid. Every action, no matter how small, mattered. These heroes didn't wait for recognition. They simply acted, propelled by empathy and urgency. In Mayfield, a man carried 3 neighbors through a shattered street to safety. In Dawson Springs, a group of teenagers found an elderly woman trapped beneath beams and furniture, carefully lifting debris until she was free. Emergency dispatchers, despite damaged communication systems, coordinated rescues tirelessly, sometimes using bicycles or ATVs to reach stranded victims. Even amid the horror, these acts of bravery offered glimmers of hope. They reminded survivors, and the world, that humanity can shine brightest in the darkest hours. Each life saved, each family reunited, was a testament to courage, resourcefulness, and the relentless spirit of people who refused to give in to despair. The Quad-State tornado tested nature's fury, but it also revealed the best of human resilience. When dawn finally broke over the Quad-State region, the full scale of devastation became painfully clear. Streets that had once been lined with homes, businesses, and schools were now piles of splintered wood, twisted metal, and rubble. Roofs were missing, walls collapsed, and cars were strewn across yards like toys. The sun illuminated the destruction, revealing a scene so surreal that it seemed almost unreal. The air was thick with dust and smoke from fires sparked by downpower lines. Birds and small animals, displaced and disoriented, wandered through the wreckage. The silence between occasional sirens was deafening, a stark contrast to the roar that had dominated the night. For many residents, the first light of day brought the bitter reality of loss. Neighbors missing, pets gone, and cherished belongings scattered or destroyed. Amid the ruins, acts of compassion emerged. Volunteers handed out food and water, comforted the traumatized, and helped organize temporary shelters. Rescue teams continued searching for survivors, moving debris and calling out names. Photographers and journalists captured images that would later tell the world the story of unprecedented destruction. Yet, despite the devastation, there were moments of awe. Sunrise over flattened fields highlighted the sheer scale of the tornado's path. People paused, reflecting on both nature's destructive power and the resilience of the communities that had endured it. Daybreak revealed the wreckage, but also the first glimmers of hope and determination to rebuild. In the weeks following the Quad-State tornado, communities faced the monumental task of rebuilding. Homes, businesses, and schools had vanished, leaving residents with nothing but memories and debris. The process was slow, grueling, and emotionally taxing, but also showcased human determination at its finest. Volunteers and organizations poured in from across the country, bringing supplies, manpower, and expertise. Local construction crews worked tirelessly alongside neighbors, clearing streets and salvaging what they could. Families who had lost everything began to piece together temporary shelters, using tarps, tents, and donated materials to create spaces of relative safety. Churches, community centers, and schools became hubs for relief, distributing food, clothing, and emotional support. Rebuilding wasn't just about structures. It was about restoring a sense of normalcy and community. Neighbors checked on each other, shared resources, and helped strangers navigate insurance claims, aid applications, and medical care. Children returned to makeshift classrooms, and businesses reopened in temporary locations, signaling resilience amid despair. Yet the scars remained. Foundations were gone, heirlooms destroyed, and streets forever altered. Each rebuilt home carried the weight of memory and survival. But for many, this work was cathartic, a tangible way to fight back against nature's fury. Communities bonded and shared grief and determination, proving that while the tornado could erase buildings, it could not erase spirit, courage, or the will to start anew. Rebuilding was slow, but each new roof and repaired street symbolized hope rising from the ruins. In the wake of the Quad-State tornado outbreak, local, state, and federal officials mobilized to respond to the unprecedented disaster. Governors declared states of emergency, activating National Guard units to assist with rescue operations, traffic control, and distribution of supplies. FEMA and other federal agencies deployed teams to coordinate relief efforts, assess damage, and provide immediate assistance to survivors. Politicians visited affected areas, offering condolences and pledging support, while emergency managers worked behind the scenes to ensure resources reached those in desperate need. Temporary shelters were established in schools, churches, and community centers, providing displaced residents with a safe place to sleep, eat, and receive medical attention. Aid organizations distributed water, food, blankets, and clothing to communities cut off by debris-strewn roads. At the same time, questions arose about preparedness and infrastructure. Critics examined whether tornado warnings were timely enough, whether shelters were adequate, and how communities could be better equipped for future events. Federal funding was discussed, aimed not just at recovery, but at improving long-term resilience and warning systems. Despite bureaucratic hurdles and logistical challenges, the coordinated response highlighted a crucial truth. When disaster strikes, human organization, leadership, and cooperation can save lives. It wasn't perfect, but every rescue, every aid shipment, and every act of coordination underscored the importance of planning, communication, and rapid action in the face of nature's wrath. The political and federal response became a blueprint for managing disasters, balancing immediate action with long-term recovery and learning from the past to protect the future. The Quad-State tornado outbreak left scientists, emergency planners, and residents asking a chilling question. Could this happen again? Meteorologists warned that while such a massive, continuous tornado is rare, the atmospheric conditions that fueled it are not impossible. Warm, moist air meeting cold, dry fronts, combined with strong wind shear, can still produce dangerous supercells, sometimes in unexpected places or seasons. Experts pointed to climate variability as a potential factor in increasing the frequency and intensity of severe storms. Warmer air holds more moisture, and stronger jet streams can create conditions for long-lived, powerful tornadoes. While no two storms are identical, the Quad-State outbreak demonstrated how quickly weather systems can evolve into catastrophic events under the right circumstances. Communities across tornado-prone regions have taken note. Emergency planners stressed the importance of robust warning systems, storm shelters, and preparedness drills. For residents, awareness and readiness can mean the difference between survival and tragedy. Winter tornadoes, once thought rare, are no longer outside the realm of possibility. While meteorologists continue to study the 2021 outbreak to understand its unique characteristics, the lesson is clear. Nature is unpredictable, and the potential for another catastrophic event exists. The Quad-State tornado serves as both a scientific case study and a warning, a reminder that, even in modern times, humanity must respect the raw power of the atmosphere and prepare for the unthinkable. The question remains, when the next storm comes, will we be ready? The aftermath of the Quad-State tornado outbreak offered hard-earned lessons for communities, scientists, and policymakers alike. One of the clearest takeaways was the critical importance of preparedness. Tornado warnings, emergency plans, and accessible shelters proved essential for survival. Yet gaps in communication and infrastructure highlighted areas for improvement. Communities learned that rapid response isn't enough. Resilience requires both planning and ongoing education. Meteorologists gained invaluable insight into the behavior of long-track tornadoes. The outbreak demonstrated how supercells can maintain strength over extraordinary distances, challenging traditional understanding and helping refine predictive models. Radar technology, early warning systems, and real-time data collection were validated as life-saving tools, but the storm also revealed where technology must continue to evolve. Socially, the disaster underscored the power of community. Neighbors helping neighbors, volunteers risking everything, and first responders working tirelessly illustrated human solidarity at its best. Even amid unimaginable destruction, people found ways to lift each other up, proving that recovery is as much about compassion as it is about rebuilding structures. Finally, the Quad-State outbreak reminded the world of nature's unpredictability. While science and preparedness mitigate risk, the atmosphere can still deliver extraordinary, deadly surprises. For those who survived, for scientists who study tornadoes, and for policymakers shaping disaster response, the lesson is both sobering and inspiring. Anticipate the worst, act decisively, and never underestimate human resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. The Quad-State tornado taught us that preparation, science, and humanity must always work hand in hand. Years after the Quad-State tornado outbreak, the scars, both physical and emotional, remain. Streets rebuilt, homes restored, and businesses reopened, yet every town touched by the storm carries memories of that fateful night. For survivors, echoes of the tornado persist in fleeting sounds, sudden gusts, or the sight of a cloud that recalls the sky's dark fury. The event has become woven into the identity of the communities it touched, a shared story of loss, resilience, and courage. Memorials have been erected to honor those who lost their lives, and anniversaries are observed with quiet reflection. Children who survived now carry their own stories, passing down lessons about the fragility of life and the strength of human spirit. Local museums and historical societies preserve photographs, videos, and personal accounts, ensuring that future generations understand both the destructive power of nature and the remarkable ways people responded. The Quad-State outbreak also left a broader legacy. Scientists continue to study the storm, refining models and warning systems to prevent future tragedies. Emergency management practices across the United States have been updated, incorporating lessons learned from those terrifying hours. Communities nationwide have become more aware, more prepared, and more vigilant. Ultimately, the tornado story is not just one of destruction. It is a testament to humanity's capacity to endure, adapt, and rebuild. Even in the face of overwhelming force, people find hope. The echoes that remain are reminders that while storms can destroy, they cannot erase the courage, compassion, and resilience of those who survive.